You have been taught that God is angry with us. That if we mess up, God gets mad at us. And He's just waiting to spank us with a big holy paddle, or even worse, to condemn us to eternal torment. That's not what Paul says. Paul is making the case that all are guilty before God. And this is the first section of that. Because God is God, as we ask the question, what is God's wrath? Because God is God, because God is characteristically holy, He cannot tolerate sin. And the wrath of God is God's annihilating reaction against sin. The word is orge, O-R-G-E, and the long mark over the E, orge. It means a passion, a heated passion. It does not mean anger. In fact, the wrath of God is not God's anger. Paul speaks of the wrath of God in several places. Sometimes, actually just in 3 places, he speaks specifically of the wrath of God. But in other places, he talks about the wrath. He speaks of that, but he never speaks of God being angry. He never mentions that God is angry. Now, he speaks of God's love and of God loving. He speaks of God's grace and His graciously giving. He speaks of God's faithfulness and of God being faithful to His people. But although he speaks of the wrath of God, he never mentions anything about God being angry. We're told not to be angry. And if we're told not to be angry, why should we put that attribute on God? Would God require us to do something that He Himself is not willing to do? And yet that's what we've been taught, that when we sin, when we fail, when we mess up, God becomes angry with us. You will never find, and I challenge you to check, you will never find God in the New Testament being angry. After the cross, you never see anything said about God being angry. God does not lose His temper. We do. Somebody wrongs us, somebody violates our trust, and we become angry, and we want to get back at them. We want to get even. God is not like that. He doesn't lose His temper. He doesn't fly into a rage. God is never malicious, spiteful, or vindictive. So if God's wrath is not equated with anger, then what is it? The wrath of God refers to the moral order in the world, and the man who transgresses the moral law sooner or later is going to suffer. Moral order, the structure of this earth, is God's wrath at work. Now, the world is made in such a way that the soul that sins must die, if indeed the moral order is left to act alone. But into this dilemma of men, there comes the love of God. And that love of God, by an act of unbelievable free grace, lifts man out of the consequences of sin and saves him from the wrath that he should have incurred. The wrath of God is the inevitable punishment of sin. But if you look back at this passage, the very first verse that we read, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness. Never does it say His wrath is unleashed against individuals. And that's a key point to understand. Does God react against godlessness and wickedness? Yes, He does. We need to understand that there are laws that need to be obeyed. There are natural laws. If you were to get up on this building and jump off, guess what? I don't care how much you doubt the law of gravity, you're still going to break something. Well, you young ones probably wouldn't, but I would. I'm more brittle than you are. You're going to discover the law of gravity even if you don't believe in it. It's something that is in effect. And God has placed laws, a moral order in this world, in this realm, that need to be observed and obeyed, not in order to please God, but for our own benefit. There's the law of agriculture. Glenn, you go out and plow and plant wheat, what do you expect to get? Of wheat. Sure. That's a law of agriculture. Now, if you don't plant anything and you go out at harvest time thinking that you're going to have a crop, are you going to? No, because you have violated the laws of agriculture. Or what about the laws of architecture? There are certain laws that need to be observed when you build a building, or else, one of these days, it's going to collapse. Laws of health. If you do things that are harmful to your body, there are going to be consequences. My uncle, who was like a grandfather to me, all of my grandparents died before I was born, and this uncle and aunt were like my grandparents. They were my mother's oldest. She was my mother's oldest sister, so there was quite a bit of age difference, and they were like our grandparents. But he smoked like a chimney. He started at 7 years old smoking Camels without the filters. And he was a chain smoker. When he turned 70 and went to the doctor said, unless you quit, you're going to be dead in 6 months. Now, was that because somebody was angry at him? No. It was just a natural consequence of the things that he had done. Now, he did quit cold turkey. He didn't have the patch. He didn't have the pill. He didn't have the gum. He quit cold turkey, laid those Camels down, and quit. Now, he told me, he said, there's never a day goes by that I don't want one. But he quit. And he ended up living 6 more years. But you see, there are certain laws of health that we need to observe. And if we clog our arteries by eating certain foods and by doing the things we're not supposed to and not exercising, and our arteries become clogged, would you consider the surgeon who says you need bypass surgery and then cracks open your chest to take a vein out of your leg and bypass the blockage so that your heart can get blood to it? Do you consider him angry at you? No. Actually, the surgery is going to help you. And that's what the wrath of God does. God's wrath is His holy hostility to evil, His refusal to condone it, His just judgment upon it. Well, against what is God's wrath revealed? I've already pointed out that God's wrath is revealed against evil alone, not against people. There is no personal ill will in the wrath of God. Nothing arouses God's wrath except evil, and evil always does. The essence of sin is godlessness. We have that here. It's the attempt to get rid of God. There's just one problem. You can't do it. And since that is impossible, to completely get rid of God, some determine to live as though they had succeeded in doing so. The essence of goodness is godliness. To love Him with all our being, to obey Him with joy, knowing that the rules that He places on us are not for His benefit, but rather are for our good. And He says there's no excuse. We know that there is a God by looking at His creation. There is no excuse